Hello my friends, Alyssa Neal here, dietitian, owner of Nourishment Nutrition, and author of the Moon Cycle Guide, Cultivate Your Feral Flame. Cultivate your feral flame, what a tongue twister. But it is a tongue twister. It's a body, mind, and tongue twister. And today we are going to go through the menstrual cycle, phase 1, menstruation or menses, or the bleeding phase, the parting of the Red Sea, the time of the month, whatever you're going to call it, we are going to explore it. So take a sip of water and let's dive in. Okay, so menstruation. A little disclaimer here. Every single person who has a menstrual cycle is going to experience the menstrual cycle vastly different, because just like we have different color eyes, hair, different base body temperatures, the menstrual cycle is going to vary depending on your health, your age, your genetics, etc. Okay? So if I say a certain number, a certain thing, and you're like, oh, I experience it different, of course you do, because you're different, and I'm different, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? So with that being said, the menstrual cycle, menstruation, part 1. Menstruation, often in our heads, honestly, when I talk about it, I almost think about menstruation or the bleeding phase as the end. But as we know, the end is always kind of a start to a new beginning, right? Often when people bleed, they have experienced PMS or premenstrual symptoms before they are bleeding. And this can be really intense. I'll talk about why in a second. But usually once bleeding begins, even if it's heavy, even if there's cramping, even if there's breast tenderness, there is some sense of relief, that moment. And so what we can use to just kind of relate back to that moment is, this is day 1. This is the start over. Menstruation, the bleeding phase, is day 1. The first day of bleeding is day 1 of the cycle. This is important if you're tracking your cycle and if you break it up into either 4 or 2 different parts so that you can track it, okay? So if you think of it as, the day I start bleeding is day 1. And day 1 starts the first phase of the menstrual cycle, menstruation. That usually lasts, depending on the person, between 4 and 10 days, okay? Very different. Some people have long bleeding cycles, some people do not. It really depends on the amount of estrogen, progesterone, your diet, your stress levels, have you been on birth control? There are so many variables that impact how long you bleed for, okay? So we have the bleeding start on day 1, okay? We can split the menstrual cycle up into generally 2 phases, and that looks like menstruation through ovulation, so not fertile through menstruation, and then somewhere as we cross over into follicular phase, usually between days, we'll just say 9 and 14 to be safe. That's follicular phase, but that also crosses over into ovulation. And ovulation is simply when you become fertile. It's when your body releases an egg that has the potential of being fertilized, okay? And if an egg gets fertilized, you are pregnant. So, how does this have to do with bleeding? So if we've bled, if we are entering into the menstrual phase of the cycle, that essentially means that we did not get pregnant. So what does it mean? What causes menstruation? So what causes menstruation is the withdrawal from progesterone. Progesterone is a sex hormone, just like estrogen. Those are not the only 2 hormones in this cycle. There's also luteinizing hormone, growth hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, right? There's lots of different hormones that are interplaying between our ovaries and our reproductive organs and our brain, our hypothalamus, our pituitary, okay? So this is not happening isolated in the pelvic center. This is something that affects our entire body. This is why it affects mood, cognition, drive, how we want to interact, right? This shit is complex, and that is why I cannot cover it in a 15-minute video, which is why there will be super extended and in-depth coursework coming out soon that is just live and super interactive. But to get back to this point here, withdrawal from progesterone is what causes us to bleed. Progesterone and estrogen are relatively high after we have ovulated. So estrogen is the highest when we ovulate. Our cheeks are really flushed, we maybe feel like our lips are more red, our breasts are a little bit bigger, we are putting out pheromones that say, hey, I'm fertile, like, you're attracted to me, I am fertile. And it's not even your own body language. It could be, but it's literally your biochemical language. You're not actually aware that this is happening. It is happening though. So estrogen spikes at ovulation, and then progesterone increases after the egg is released. Progesterone is essentially the progestation hormone. It is for gestation. It is for making a baby. What does it do? It raises our body temperature so that we can incubate the egg that we released should it be fertilized, okay? It supports our stress response. It supports our brain. It supports our nervous system, okay? It also relaxes smooth muscle tissue so that we can have better bowel movements, a very important thing for hormone health. If you're constipated, you're reabsorbing hormones that your liver worked really hard to metabolize, put into your gut, and then have you excrete. If you're constipated, you're reabsorbing those, right? Progesterone also supports the elimination of those. Progesterone gives off metabolites in the liver after it's been metabolized that help us to sleep better, help us to have deeper sleep, more vivid dreams. Progesterone acts on so many levels. So when that egg that we released at ovulation does not get fertilized, what ends up happening is the corpus luteum, which is the more technical term for it, it regresses and it stops giving off the progesterone that it was putting into our bloodstream in the first place. And once the body goes, oh, that egg's not going to get fertilized, progesterone has decreased, we go from feeling pretty good, often a little bit more turned in and a little bit more reflective, but still, often before menstruation, women experience being really turned on, being very spiritual, being connected to themselves and their spirit, and being a little bit more tuned in and sensitive to some of the more finer details, right? So progesterone is very helpful. Now, it goes away a little bit, not entirely, but in relation to how high it was premenstrually during luteal phase, we now hit menstruation and boom. What causes menstruation? The lack or withdrawal of progesterone. And what that does when the body starts withdrawing from progesterone, or specifically more acutely, when the uterus, the endometrium, starts withdrawing from progesterone, it sends it an inflammatory response, right? So there's this inflammatory cascade that starts happening. And you're going, hold on, inflammation happens? That's what makes me bleed? Yes, it sure does. If you think about inflammation, you stub your toe, boom, toe gets swollen, it gets a little edematous, right? It holds some water, it gets hot to the touch, it becomes red. Inflammation has a purpose. It is part of the healing cascade. It's what kicks off the body's immune response, right? Red blood cells, white blood cells go to that spot. Same thing with prostaglandins and different, essentially inflammation markers. And so the same thing happens to your endometrium that has been built up. Your body mounts an inflammatory response and it says, hey, this egg is not fertilized, so we're going to get rid of this so that we can start the cycle again, and so that we can prevent pathogens, so that we can clear out the tissue that didn't work, so that we can essentially evolve, right, and continue on in the cycle of, do we want to be pregnant right now? Can we conceive? So progesterone leaves, inflammation happens, and your body begins to, through inflammation, become a little bit more swollen, right? We experience edema to an extent where the body starts to hold water, and these inflammatory markers go to the localized site. And this actually makes it so that our body is like, cool, we're ready to get rid of the endometrium. We're ready to shed the lining of the uterus that we did not actually end up needing because that egg was not fertilized. And so once we begin to withdraw from progesterone, we begin to feel like crap, right? That's not the end of the story though, because we feel like crap because our body is withdrawing from a hormone that makes us feel really good, okay? And it's also requiring a lot of energy. It just required a lot of energy to build up that endometrium, which is a collection of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, blood cells, tissue, etc. And it kept our temperature higher, which if you know anything about heat, what is heat? It's energy, right? So just doing that and building up the endometrium requires energy. And now the body's going, hey, you know what? This cycle, we did not conceive, so we're going to get rid of the endometrium. Please slow down. Please conserve energy at this time, because inflammation is slightly stressful and it's slightly traumatic, right? Now, I don't say this in a way to say every time you get your period it's going to be absolutely traumatizing, but the time of bleeding is a time for slowing down. It's a time when the body is going, hey, I'm actually putting energy toward an immune response. I'm actually putting energy toward taking this thing I built and realizing we're not going to use it this time around and getting rid of it, right? And so because there is inflammation involved, often there's a lot of symptoms that people experience, okay? Especially if we're living in a state that promotes inflammation. What might that look like? Well, being constipated is a huge one. If you're constipated, like I said earlier, you're going to reabsorb sex hormones that your body's trying to get rid of. Too much chronic stress, TV, lights past dark, consumption of a lot of sugar, consumption of vegetable oils. Vegetable oils promote inflammation because they can be made into arachidonic acid, which is a precursor to prostaglandins and eicosanoids, which are inflammatory molecules, okay? I'm spitting over here because I'm so excited, but I can't help it because it's so clear, it's so connected. Dairy has bovine growth hormone in it. Okay? Now, I'm not saying dairy is bad for everyone, but if you experience insane breast tenderness and menstrual cramps, those are inflammatory symptoms. So you can cut out refined carbohydrates, dairy, vegetable oils, and replace them with things like ghee and pasture butter and fish and lots of greens and beans to help with elimination, right? There's all these things we can do. A couple of my favorites, hold, for minimizing symptoms. Magnesium, okay? You can take magnesium. You don't want to overtake it, but if you take it in about 100 milligram doses a couple times a day when you start menstruating, it will bring down the pain response, the cramping, and it will also smooth muscle tissue, okay? I recommend these to all of my menstruating clients, seriously. You need to be careful because fish oil thins the blood. So if you are on a blood thinner, consult a doctor or a pharmacist. In fact, if you're going to take any of these, please consult a doctor or a pharmacist. However, research has shown that 1,000 milligrams of EPA and 750 milligrams of DHA, which are both types of omega-3 fatty acids, reduce inflammation to the point that they will reduce breast tenderness and they will reduce period pain, cramping pain, right? Pain is a sign of inflammation. Two others. This company also makes one that has cramp bark in it. It's amazing. You can take them in high doses. One day I drank a whole bottle of the cramp bark one. I was in super high stress. I was working in a not great environment and I had terrible cramps. Drank it all day and they went away. And then there's L-theanine. L-theanine helps to support the brain. It supports mood. It is purely an amino acid. It is found in tea leaves, and it is why some people can have caffeine from tea without getting jittery. Add L-theanine in, and it will help to support your mood and that crossover. Okay, those are just 4 little sample tools, right? There's also drinking plenty of water. A lot of my clients will go on something I call biotransformation protocol, where biotransformation is the technical word for detox, and it literally supports them having regular bowel movements so that they can move hormone metabolites out of their body, okay? So yes, the menstrual cycle is really intense. Yes, the menstrual cycle has symptoms. Yes, menstruation phase specifically has the most symptoms. Yes, they are symptoms of inflammation. Inflammation has a purpose. However, if we optimize by reducing stress, sleeping more, eating better, staying hydrated, doing all of these things, and personalizing it for ourselves, we will experience the menstrual cycle as an immensely powerful tool in order to receive feedback from our body to say, hey, what can we do better to serve this vessel? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Your body, if you have a menstrual cycle, is giving you this feedback all the time. And menstruation phase is when it all comes to a T, boom. here's our immediate feedback, and here's what we can do with it, okay? Like I said, 15 minutes is nothing to talk about menstruation phase. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want more information, leave your comments, your questions, your experiences in the comments. DM me, email me, text me, work with me. I love this topic. It is life-changing.